Off we go on day two. And as before, I would say that one of the great thrills yesterday was to have this sensation of having about 2,000 people sitting together doing centering prayer from all over the world. You could actually feel it as a palpable force and energy moving through the planet. We're about at that point again today, and so as we sit here, really, trusting that wherever you are in the world, uh, however it looks like you're just sitting in front of a screen somewhere, that really there is something in the instantaneous, non-localized fusion of hearts that happens in this practice, uh, that's happening as we do it. So give yourself to this 20 minutes as if you were sitting in the middle of a cathedral somewhere. You are. It's called the Cathedral of the Earth. And as we did yesterday, we're easing into these with some readings from that very, very familiar and comforting gospel from Luke. Luke's beautiful teaching on abundance and lack of worry. And this is, of course, particularly intended as a consolation and balm and encouragement as we enter this time, as we continue to move through this time of pandemic and global rearrangement. So with that in heart, get yourself centered in your body. Really take just a little space as we begin. It's called centering prayer. Bring yourself in physically, get collected inside your being. Rumi has a wonderful phrase, quivering like a drop of mercury. Be present. And then, without thinking about these familiar words, simply let the words fall into that gathered pool of your presence. And they'll continue to percolate there as we move from there directly into 20 minutes of centering prayer. And so, in the name of God, Creator, Redeemer, Sanctifier, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. From Luke 12:22. He said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to the span of your life? If then you are not able to do such a small thing as this, why do you worry about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of those." Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Be still. Be. And as you're ready, spaciously, with no rush at all, let yourself come back into your normal operational mode, carrying something of the taste of the state we've all experienced together as we move into the teaching and business of the day. So first of all, to questions. We'll take about a half an hour or so, or as long as there's juice running in it and I don't get nervous about all the things I'm going to want to steal time for my own presentation. But thank you all for your beautiful, spirited participation in drowning me in questions, comments, and observations. And thank you to our wonderful team that took time to pore over these questions and divide them beautifully into categories so I could kind of put through and have it all at my hands. I've read them all, and they will all have a presence in how I respond to you today, how I shape and craft the talk. I'm hearing, and I love to hear what's in your minds and hearts. So even if I don't directly address a question, please know that you have been heard, and I'm deeply appreciative. So I'll take a few of them in various categories. They've all been questions related to self, true self, false self, no self, questions about Trinity, Godhood, manifest, unmanifest, pandemic related, presence of those who have passed, interspiritual, other. Wow, what a laundry list. So I'm going to not directly answer at this point any questions related to true self, false self, because that's going to be the bulk of our presentation and study in my presentation this morning. And I hope that most of them will get addressed there, and the ones that don't will come back and circle back to. Couple of practice related questions, just because it gets us started on a good practical basis. Here's one. At the end of his life, did Father Thomas still recommend we do centering prayer twice a day for 20 minutes, or did his thoughts change? Well, I'd say yes, he did. He still recommended this, and for very good reasons, although his own practice had certainly shifted by then. It certainly is the nature of any mature practitioner on any mature practice to become more free-form in their practice over the years. Monks, particularly older monks, do Lectio Divina really, really differently from how people do when they sit in Lectio Divina groups. The things will loosen up. They'll become more free-form, more flowing. That's the nature of things. But the danger is always to let it get free-form too fast. You know, if you really look at your prayer practice as a sturdy river through which flows this wonderful connection between your heart and the divine heart, it needs to flow through steady, sturdy riverbanks. And that's what the structure around practice gives for us. It helps build sturdy containers that our practice can flow in. And the tendency is to get a little airy-fairy too fast, a little, well, you know, maybe 20 minutes today, maybe not, you know. And so without getting to the other edge of a sort of obsessive rigidity, the more you can maintain structure, particularly in the formative parts of your practice, the more easily the practice will carry you as you do reach that place in your life where it wants organically to become freeform. And for heaven's sake, don't ever fall into the trap of calling my practice is freeform to be an excuse for you're thinking you've attained proficiency in practice, or you'll get dragged right back to the fence again. We're beginners all our life. When one gets lost in prayer, lost written here in caps, in prayer, silence, contemplation. Even some monks and priests accuse one of escapism. How can one tell whether one is escaping life's responsibilities or having an actual encounter with God? Well, there's an inside and an outside to this question. And the outside one is have no fear. This has been an accusation that's been hurled against contemplatives from the get-go. Oh, you're just sitting on your cushion doing nothing while the world is crying. But in point of fact, you're an epicenter in prayer. And the strongest possible communion and force, not only with your fellow human beings, but with help that comes to us from beyond, is pouring in. It's a very powerful channel of presence, instruction, and guidance. And that's one of the reasons we're doing this conference, one of the themes. There's nothing wimpy, nothing escapist about the act of contemplation. It's a profound act of courage, opening up, and presence to the world. Remember the final famous lines of Dag Hammarskjöld, who says, well, the world is going to hell in a handbasket. I only need 4 hours of meditation today. Because the prayer establishes us, stabilizes us in our being, and lets us go forward. Somebody asked in a later question, this word I used, I've heard of ecstasy before, but what's instasy? You spell it E-N-S-T-A-S-Y, and it refers to standing in yourself, a term I first heard from Beatrice Bruto, that wonderful spiritual teacher. Fiercely present, collected, not knocked off your feet by every wind blowing through the world. It's this quality of presence that contemplation develops. So don't be gun shy, the people that think you're only helping when you're frantically doing. Hold your line there. You are contributing. But there is an inside to this question, that we want our consciousness to be bright during prayer. We want to show up. This doesn't mean thinking. It definitely doesn't mean thinking. But you can tell the difference in your centering prayer, if you're honest with yourself, between when you're gathered and present, alert, and when you've just gone stale. When you're, somehow you've evaded your intention mechanism and you're just daydreaming. And you can also tell when you're just deliberately running into the prayer to seek nothing, to escape from your own self. None of these are attitudes that work with centering prayer. We are actively, consciously, brightly, presently surrendering to the presence and action of God, consenting to that presence and action. And in that, the prayer maintains its inner vibrancy and becomes that living channel through which the water can flow. So a question about the word. In the centering prayer, selecting a word such as the mantra given by the Maharishi 20 years ago is okay? Does the word change over time? Is it better to select a word or phrase more sacred to my Eastern tradition? Thank you. Well, over the course of his life, Thomas was ever evolving in his understanding of what the word is, or those other placeholders, the divine gaze, the divine nothing, as David Frenette calls it. At the beginning, there was more teaching, and certainly in Basil Pennington's School of Centering Prayer, that the word was special. It took all of your little feelings about God and summed them up into one dense little pack. And so there's tendency to obsess on the word and want to get it right. Get a word that just sort of is a selfie, essentially, a picture of you in prayer. Thomas moved steadily away from that. Your word is not special. Your word is merely a placeholder for your intention. And you're not supposed to stare at it. You're not supposed to obsess about it. It doesn't help you if it's special, if it reverberates with your tradition. It can sometimes get in the way. because it begins to become too much about you. It's sort of like, if you're driving the car in a rainstorm, like people are doing out in front of my house today, uh, the word is like a windshield wiper. It simply flicks the screen clear, and you're not supposed to stare at the windshield wiper. Uh, so the word should be little. The word should be simple. The word should not trigger thinking. And with that in mind, it's also best to consider your word a long-term engagement, because the way it really works, it does its work in the unconscious. Every time you use it, you're placing it in the unconscious. And what actually happens in your prayer is that when something helps you to become aware that you're thinking, it's not like you actually, oh, I'm aware, I'm thinking, now I'm going to return to my word. Actually, you'll discover the word it comes up and actually reminds you. It's the thing that's already there reminding you, oh, you're thinking. So the word works like a iceberg, 90% under the water. So the more it's actually becomes stable and respectful at levels below your conscious choice, the better it's going to do its job. Okay, so much for practice questions for now. Let's sort of get our minds up and rolling with a couple of theological questions from yesterday. How is the Godhead different from God the Father? Can you elaborate about this? Well, one of the friends in the question just following says that this hair's breadth of distinction is often misunderstood even in Orthodox Christianity. But the idea of the Godhood, when you properly understand it, is not the Father. And perhaps the best way to sort of work into this is by a wonderful comment that Raymond Panikkar made in his book, Christophany. He said, look at the word father. Father is a relational term. Father is not a synonym for source. You only get to be a father by having a child. So the term in and of itself speaks of relational, being embedded in a relational unit, in a relational field. And for Christianity, the name of that relational field is the Trinity. And so the Father is properly understood as the name that we use when we're working within that relational field. And you're quite right that what the mystics are trying to point to ever so delicately in this term Godhead is the sense that Trinity is not all there is. I should have brought soap along, so I should wash out my mouth with it right now. But this sentiment that the Trinity is the first manifesting principle. It's the principle by which, as the great 17th century mystic Jacob Boehme says, the divine endlessness brings itself into somethingness by bringing itself into divisibility and relationship. So this idea, and of course you play that by a Western theologian and they go, huh? They're nothing but the Trinity. So forgive us, if Western Christians are basically scratching their heads. But the Eastern Orthodox, as well as the sort of out there edge of mystics of all stripes, have always said, no, the Trinity is the first manifesting principle. It's what lets the emptiness come into form. The silence births forth as endless creativity, is how Thomas describes it in these poems. And behind that is a state that's so delicate and so awesome that we almost don't know how to touch it. Inaccessible light is a word that's often been used. So I don't know whether that helps or just sort of leaves you all scratching your head. I'd say it's almost irrelevant and don't bother yourself with it, except that is exactly the edge that Thomas is going to be dragging you to in these poems. So I think it's really useful to have at least a little bit of a sense of what he's looking out over the edge at, like a Moses here. This sense of something behind the Trinity is a primordial mystical sensibility that we're going to see here. Take it for what it's worth. Somebody says, the idea of unmanifest absorption holds the manifest, works for me, but I find I'm falling back into a dualism between the manifest and unmanifest. Help? Well, what if we didn't call it a dualism, but called it instead a symbiotic unity? We've been using this term dualism nowadays like it's a boogeyman. Oh, that's dualistic. Two-ness is part of the created order. Things only become dualistic when they get directly polarized and oppositional. But so much lives in this state that it's beautifully used in that word that'll make you win a Scrabble game, syzygy, S-Y-G-Y, something like that. It's this dynamic, interactive union between the whole and the part, the greater and the lesser. Is the mother and her fetus a dualism? I think not. Is two flesh becoming one a dualism? I think not. Is the secret embrace of the infinite transcendent with the creator God one a dualism? No, because the dynamism is what makes it goes forward. Hard to wrap your minds around, right? But fortunately, through your time of mystical practice and the developing of the center of perception that lies in your heart, you can begin to taste these mysteries that just make the mind go, huh? Now, with that, there's a wonderful thing. Was Thomas a pantheist? Another, I should have brought that soap along. More washing out your mouth with soap. We Christians have been trained to be horrified of pantheism. We come by this honestly by 2,000 years of horror in the Old Testament. That the sense that anything that God is actually manifest in creation, that a bird or a rock or a stone could be God? Horrors. No. And at its time and in its place, this was an evolutionary breakthrough in consciousness in the history of humankind. And Israel did carry it to say that, no, God is not just a little rock. God is some overarching Father of all, holding us in covenant. Huge evolutionary advance in consciousness. But I believe that we have now come to the end of that paradigm, and certainly the way it's been used by theologians, which is blatantly dualistic in the term that I've been using it as. God is not in the world. God is above the world. And if you say God is in the world, you are a pantheist. And then some people try to use this term panentheism to say, well, God is in the world, but doesn't get caught there. We really need a new paradigm. And Thomas's teaching implies this paradigm, and it's a paradigm which is directly affirmed by modern physics, that we live in a field. And in this field, created and uncreated orders are always sort of switching off, the symbiotic unity again, and things are rolling from finite to infinite, and the infinite is embracing the finite and popping into finite and popping out of it like a virtual bubble. Everything is in motion. Everything is interpenetrating everything. You have a little piece of the divinity of God in you, and God has a little bit of the divinity of you in God. It's all bound up and moving. And so the term pantheism draws an artificial boundary. And as long as you observe that and use that as your baseline for doctrinal purity, you will be unable to take this step into the co-inherence, the unitive wholeness of all things, that both our prayer and our world are achingly calling us to. Pantheism is not good theology, and it's not good science. It was transcended and replaced, by Einstein in 1905, and it's high time we caught up with that. So I hope that's not too cheeky. Here's a really interesting question in the others. It says, these poems are much more focused on the future than the present and how we live our lives. That's a fascinating comment, and I want to honor that comment and honor that impression. But I think that there's something here that we really need to pay attention to. Otherwise, I wouldn't have come to this question. I think it was such a alert ear that very often we think of the future as simply the next point on a linear timeline, and they're up ahead. So what may look like future for you at this point, for Thomas, was the present. He was living this. He was, those last 6 weeks of his life were just infinite, one now just sort of fading into the next now. This was brutal presence, presence without any sort of a timeline to distract. And I'd like to suggest to you that all along, it's this idea of the past, the present, and the future is a mirage of our thinking. It does not have any long-term validity. It's a very useful convention for getting around in this world. But ultimately, what we often call the future is the downloading, the sudden downpour of a larger presence in which we are simultaneously embedded and don't even know it. The future erupts into and onto the horizontal timeline, and we experience this as a moment of eternity in the midst of it. It's actually just a foretaste of what the actual state of affairs is all along. So essentially what happens as the spiritual journey matures is that our capacity for the present just expands and expands and expands. And rather than things getting sequenced, we discover that from right here in the center of our being, we can reach out in a kind of funny way, comprehend the whole of our life in one eye blink of the heart. And then beyond that, the life of the world. It's an extraordinary thing that attention can do when it's centered. There is no future. There is only larger life meeting ours. As Thomas, or as Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am. And it's that I am that will save us as we move through this pandemic, that will reorient us, that will guide us. And so, these poems throw us back because we are not used to this sort of naked immediacy. And one of the things that's actually happening out there in the pandemic right now is people are getting a lot more used to it because the world has been sent to its room, as some people say, for a month and 6 weeks. And we say, now what? Now what do we do? You can't go to your meeting, you can't go shopping, you can't, well, you can Zoom all day if you want, or you can also just lean into it. Face the emptiness, which is really the immense presence of the now. A now you're not ready to absorb yet because all the structures of your mind and heart and brain are set up to project you into time and find you as you run along the timeline. But there is something else. And the contemplatives have always known how to turn to it. It's the turning into what looks like the emptiness to find that it is the beginning of the infinite timelessness, and that your soul can adjust to it. And that out of this fertile ground of that infinite timelessness, you can in fact speak from truth, from clarity, and from a courage that lies beyond death, because death is merely the last notch on this timeline. So, wow. Just one question before we segue into the talk, or a couple more. Someone says, does this pandemic represent a collective relinquishing of the human false self? Would that it were true. I think it represents a collective confrontation with the human false self, big time. But what we do with that confrontation, I think, is exactly the point in which the next little question that was asked is asked, are you optimistic about the transition we are experiencing now? I don't know yet. Once you confront it, what do? Do you relinquish it, or do you sweep it back under the rug? Do you repress it? And I think that's always the battle, and that's what hangs in the balance as we move on into this time. Yes, the scab has been ripped off the wound. We must see ourselves. There's no doubt about that. But what we will do with that seeing is really up to the courage, the trust, the faith that somehow has come to dwell in our own hearts and in the collective strength of our body. That's exactly what's at stake for me, anyway, as we move into this teaching. One of the reasons I was so eager to take it on and so grateful for the group here in Contemplative Outreach and supporting each other and going forward with it, because I think this is up for grabs. And I do believe that we as contemplatives have some insights and some resources to offer back into our broken world, reeling as its shadow side becomes hideously manifest, to give us comfort, solace, and direction. Pray to God that we can access ourselves of those reserves. So I think that may be enough for questions for now. If we have time at the end, if there is any end, I'll sidle back and maybe hit a few more. There's one I wanted to sort of address, but I have a feeling that it will take me down a long goose chase where I will wind up getting myself further and further into left field. And there is business to be done for today. So we move back to Thomas Keating, The Secret Embrace. And we're going to be focusing now on 3 poems which are really in their way a journey through what you might call the dark night passage. They're the middle poems in the group, and I'm going to approach them from that perspective. And they shed some new light on the dark night, for sure, as well as wrenching our hearts and pulling us farther and farther along in both, and I think in our sober appraisal of what we're up against. So I want to begin by giving you a little bit of general background, framing some pieces in, and then probably what will happen is we'll take a short break and dive into the poems. I'm not sure yet. We'll see how this next little bit goes. But I want to talk a little bit in general terms about the false self journey and about Thomas's important modifications and innovations on an ancient Christian roadmap. And a lot of this will be very, very familiar ground, I would say, dare say, for most of you, because it's probably where you got your start in centering prayer and centering prayer teaching. So we're going to be reviewing some familiar ground, but perhaps taking it to some unfamiliar places. Classically, in Christianity, the roadmap for the spiritual journey was seen as a three-part roadmap uh, consisting of the purgative way, the illuminative way, and the unitive way. And that roadmap has been around since the days of Pseudo-Dionysius, or the 6th century. And it's guided the Christian journey then for 13 centuries. Ancient, venerable map. Purgative, which if you hear the word purgative and purgation in there, well, you got it. It's basically about cleaning up your act before God. The illuminative way gets in. Illuminative means light-filled, basically. You hear lumina in there. And it's sort of the best way of paraphrasing this phase of the journey would be in the wonderful old AA phrase now, God is my co-pilot. You and God cruise along in a wonderful partnership. You're still very much in your finite self, but your will has been surrendered into God. And the two of you make music together in beautiful, creative ways. And then there's something beyond called the unitive that people point to as still a final stage, as a kind of further unity of being, which has something to do not only with the union of your wills, but somehow a closer fusion or uniting of your very beings. And they talk about this often in the tradition, typically in the Christian tradition, in nuptial language, language of the wedding and of the bridal chamber, of an ultimate kind of conjugation. Very, very wonderful poetry to get this sense of this intense consummation of love. So a further union that unites the two back into one. But is it a matter of the drop dissolving in the ocean? Or is it the ocean becoming fully, completely manifest in the drop? Is it is not I who lives, but Christ in me? Or is it not I who lives, but Christ in me as my deepest I? And this has been left deliberately obscure, vague over the ages, because it's finally your mystery to discover. It is the secret embrace, and everyone has to do it in their own way. But that's at least the roadmap that'll get you up and running. If you consider the peaks, if you consider these unitive, purgative, illuminative, unitive as plateaus, between them, there are the sand traps, known as the dark night. Traditionally, the dark night of the soul being the first sand trap, the dark night of the spirit being the second. And in these, some sort of purgation happens, a sort of scouring and purification that allows the access to the next stage. For John of the Cross, who really sort of set these charts and put the phrase dark night on the map, the dark night of the soul had to do with the purgation, the stripping away of spiritual consolations. In other words, we started to embrace God because it was pleasurable. We got something out of it. It titillated us. And what happens? So, you just get the plug pulled out from under you. And what happens when prayer gets dry, when you feel the absence of God more than the presence? And so it's a purification. It's learning how to live for God alone and not for the pleasure you get out of God in the ancient formation. The dark night of the spirit was more mysterious, and people only allude to it in terms that are only a little bit scary to begin with, like vertigo, blasphemy. But it basically points to something that has to do with a slow but steady erosion or pulling away of the basic perceptual systems in a person by which a sense of separate selfhood is sustained. In other words, the roots of your consciousness that run the program of identity through separation begin to slowly get melted away, so that you really see oneness because you see from oneness. But this turns out, this isn't fun and pleasant. This isn't like sitting there on a mountaintop and being mystically melted away. This is an agonizing, in most cases, upheaval and disorientation of every mechanism you've ever used in your life to find your I, to know you're you, to know you're there, to know you're a person in time with a history and relatives and things you value, and boom, the price of this unitive way is somehow the letting go of that illusion that gave you life in the first place. I am the veil that hides the paradise I seek. Not an easy realization. So that kind of gives us the map, the basic map. Now, what did Thomas bring to this map? Thomas brought some extremely significant innovations. That it was his interest all along to update the old language of psychology or of theology and philosophy, and put it more in the language of psychology, so it interfaced better with therapeutic work and recovery work people might also be doing, give them a real basis to work on themselves without evasion and without doing what is now popularly called spiritual bypassing. In other words, using your spiritual practice to squash and repress your dark side, because Thomas came to know you can't do it that way. You only create a mess, certainly for yourself and even more for everybody else. That there is no journey to wholeness without confronting the shadow. And he realized perfectly well that the place that people were confronting their shadow was not in the church, but in their recovery groups and their therapy groups, that we actually had a language that was doing something. And so he was very, very interested in bringing the classical map into alignment with these tools that we now had that were allowing us actually to do some honest dismantling. So he made the big leap by starting with something he called the false self. And as he did this, he very, very much reframed what false self is. Thomas Merton had used the term before him, but Thomas Merton used it in the much more generic way as sort of a synonym for the egoic self, any manifestation of I. For Thomas, the false self was always the wounded, neurotic self, the homemade self, as he called it, that came into existence to give us some sort of satisfaction and means of dealing with our emotional programs for happiness. And there was a very powerful placement in this, because it really allowed people to get working on the journey. If the false self is this, if the false self is basically grows out of our hidden agendas of our emotional presence programs for happiness, then it's what stands in the way, that blocks the road of the true self. So the work of prayer, the work of the psychotherapeutic work, the recovery work we're doing along with it, is to aid in the program of dismantling the false self. And this was the teaching he brought so beautifully forward, particularly in his Human Condition series and his spiritual journey ones. And it gave people profound tools for, first of all, identifying where they were getting stuck. And second, seeing the relationship between their journey of healing and the resources offered to them in centering prayer. That as you sat in the presence of the divine therapist, consenting to the presence and action of God, a lot of the dismantling of the false self went on. Your attitude of trust in it got strengthened, and the whole thing proceeded along nicely. But so what exists on the other side of the dismantling of the false self? Do we emerge from that as the true self? And this became the growing edge of Thomas's teaching from the time that you first had the spiritual journey tapes and then book The Human Condition back in the late 1980s to where he finally wound up. As I said, he kept moving the goalpost. That what became the false self became more and more comprehensive, and what became the true self moved more and more out there toward the unitive edge. So there are still folks that believe that this is true, that you bring your false self, you sit down on your meditation cushion, you go to your support groups, and pretty soon you emerge dismantled, and the butterfly that emerges is your true self. Doesn't work that way. What has emerged is really the opposite of the false self. In this sense, is unfortunately not the true self. It's the high-functioning ego. It's it's what classically would have been called the ego self, but that's a dicey term because people use it in a couple different ways that fight with each other. You can call it the narrative self. It's the term I like, which means you're still deriving your sense of yourself by remembering the story of yourself. You still perceive yourself in particle form as a person with distinct characteristics, tastes, aptitudes. But now you've got it together because you're less dominated by the false self. And so you can make your way in life with a lot less backlash. But as he moved along in his journey, he laid out increasingly two other options. One is there all along. It's something called the witnessing self. And it's something a term that Christians tend to still be a little squeamish about. The term itself and the whole turf is much better developed in Asian, typologies of the person. But it's still there. Thomas knew about it. It's yourself as it begins to get out of particle form and assume the wave shape. It's less boundaried. It's less tied to a finite sense of likes and dislikes. It's capable of equanimity, of watching. And the fact that he knew this is really, some people said Thomas was never talking about a witnessing self, but he was. In one of his most well-loved aphorisms, he says, starting to do the practice of centering prayer is like watching yourself from there is like going to a second-rate movie. You can just walk out. And you see this wonderful split that rather than yourself being the plank you're standing on, you can now look at it and say, well, I can just walk out. Something deeper in you is holding this little character that struts and frets its hour on the stage. That's the witnessing stuff. And I would say, moreover, that the welcoming prayer is aimed directly at the witnessing self. A fact frequently, as a matter of fact, I would say nearly always missed by people who teach it. It makes no sense whatsoever when you try to apply it to the narrative self. It just gets in the way. It calls forth that other thing in you that stands deeper than that. And if you work with it there, it will dramatically strengthen your stability of identity in witnessing self. But is this all there is? Is that the true self then? Is witnessing self the true self? Are we there yet? Well, maybe Thomas might have thought so, but no. It's the goalpost still moves further. And it was Bernadette Roberts, damn her, impudent lady, who said, no, there's something beyond this that we call no self. And everybody tried to correct her. All the men tried to correct her, said, no, dear, you only mean, you're talking about the dissolution of the ego self into the witnessing self. No, she said, no, I mean, there's something drops out so that whole finite separation endures another yet peeling away of the onion skin. And something else is there so that not even the boundaried self is there anymore. The boundary goes, boop. And they said, no way. But this was the turf that Thomas was destined to explore. God loved Bernadette for naming it. And God loved Thomas for living into it. Because now we see a little bit of where this whole map is going. And as we look at it, we bring it into alignment with some of the greatest mystics of our tradition, Meister Eckhart and some of the others, and realize that's what they were pointing to. So this is the ground we're covering here. I would say that if you want to sort of try and equate these now, fourfold steps from false self to narrative self, witnessing self, no self, and line them up with the traditional map of unitive, purgative, and illuminative. You might want to do it in this way. Purgative covers the ground, basically, between false self and narrative self. And then the journey that's covered in the old illuminative state is the journey across the narrative self. It's everything you do beautifully with God as your co-pilot. You still firmly and healthily placed in your finite self, God up there in the skies, closely sheltering you or maybe jumping into your hip pocket sometime. That journey. The journey where most of us and most of Christianity live our life. The journey across that last stage, the journey of the illuminative self ends with the moving into the witnessing self, as that becomes the seat of our identity. And then this last leg of the journey from witnessing to no self covers the whole terrain, the whole journey that unfolds under the banner of the last one, the unitive. Now, Bernadette Roberts, the other way she made herself unpopular to people was she said that unitive is not the final thing, that unitive is itself a journey, and that it starts in witnessing presence, and then it goes all the way to this final, boop, and there's no self. You disappear, God disappears. All is all. And so she had the audacity to say that John of the Cross didn't even get all the way across the unitive journey. God, did people hate her? But she's right. And so we now have this larger typology. And of course, then, across this, the dark nights fit into place, but something very interesting develops in the process. The first dark night still holds the ground where it always was, between purgative and the unitive, between false self and the emergence of a stable, healthy narrative self. The classic dark night of spirit, as it's been traditionally understood, then takes shape right on that cusp of transition between narrative self, the last outpost of me as a finite person in relationship to this other thing that I call God, as we begin to move into something deeper, into the waveform of ourself. And so, of course, the basic structures of our separate consciousness are beginning to be eroded. And along the way, then, it begins to assume that there is another dark night that begins to assume. And whether it takes the shape of a continuous undertow along the same journey or as another dark night, it's the point where even the presence of consciousness of the witnessing self that can gaze upon the splendor of the divine as other, as thou, disappears. And there is, in some sense, no more consciousness anymore, since consciousness means with knowing. There's just that original unity. So there can be a second dark night as that is embraced, as you really stand right at the edge of that secret embrace between the infinite and the creator, the creativity. Uh, and Thomas was hemming in, converging on that one as well. So this is wild territory out there. And I want to just sort of set the stage with that, because we're going to be looking at poems of dark night, particularly two in here, one of which stands at the sort of headwater transition, the one where you move from the last scraps of, finite self. You're placing your identity there. And the second being, as you begin to come closer and closer to the threshold of this other one. We're going to be looking at both. Amazingly, Thomas captures even that second one in words, thereby giving really poetic affirmation to something that Bernadette Roberts sensed by the seat of her pants. Now, before we just turn and start doing that, I want to make at least two kind of caveats or disclaimers about this. First of all, just a general one. In using maps of any kind like this, even the classic map of the purgative, unitive, illuminative ways, a map can provide you with a view, but it can also distort that view. And a lot of people waste many years of their life trying to cram their life into a map. Is this my dark night? Is this my... It doesn't work the same for anybody. A map is an engineering schematic, and the human soul is not an engineered piece, it's an art piece. So just because it happens in a certain way to many people doesn't mean that that's the map for you. And there's a time where you finally just throw the map overboard anyway. So we're using these as helpful frames, not schematics, let alone directional orders for the journey. Second, I'd like to say really, really clearly that although that we talk in terms of one giving way and replaced by another, it does not actually work like this. Ken Wilber has a wonderful sort of aphorism, transcend and include. And sometimes you get the sense that as you pass through each of these stages, it never is there again. Well, I'm done with my false self. It's all dismantled there. And I do the narrative self. Narrow self is done. I'll never go there again. Witnessing self is done. No, we never get done. And what's amazing is that all these selves that we've transcended are still there for us or against us. And we can take up any one of them as clothing for hospitality, for protection, or just to keep us honest. And one of the beautiful things that Thomas traces in his final journey, in the last three poems that we're going to be looking at tomorrow, is how, having touched the very threshold of the completely ineffable, you can still come back into form, smile, laugh, give blessing, joke, receive dignitaries in your bedroom, and enjoy the shape of the mountains. We do it. We get to live in all ourselves. So when you talk about progress along this journey, you're not talking about the final setting aside of any one of these things. You're talking simply about where the pendulum of your selfhood, if you want to call it that, habitually comes to rest. And I would say for most of it, it's a very, very good journey indeed. If the pendulum of our selfhood can begin to come to rest stably right on the edge of witnessing consciousness, so that you can move forward from there into a sort of ability to see what this whole increasingly infinite and eternal journey is all about, but can also move back in the other way and pick up your narrative self like a good, faithful tool to get about your business in the world. It's a good life's journey to get there. And I think it's the journey that our prayer practices support us on so well, that many of you are coming to so beautifully, that as you follow this path, particularly those of you who've been practicing it for 4 decades or so, you're pretty much at the end of your narrative self. You know that inwardly. You know, the only thing that's waiting for you is the map that says, oh yeah, I do this all along. So we're getting there, and this is wonderful because we help the planet in that configuration, perhaps more than any other configuration. It's what it actually means to be a human being, not a subhuman being. And the final bits of the journey that we're looking at, I'd like to say very strongly, are not for everybody. And you can relax about this as soon as you get it out of the map of it being a kind of competition, and this is the merit, this is the Eagle Scout of the spiritual journey. If you just get rid of that map, bearing this last phase of the journey is always bearing a very special vocation, is bearing a part of the collective pain body of humanity on behalf of others as an already incipient cosmic servant. We are not all called to do that. I remember when we first sort of looked into this turf when I was leading the retreat in Hartford, a lot of people said, well, I don't know if I want to go on this journey anymore. I think I'll just stop where I am and call it good. That's a good response. And so I want you, particularly as we lay this out, not to let your ambition get hooked at this, not to think that this is where you have to go if you really want to go the way. This is by invitation. And the invitation, if you don't feel it extended to you, it's not because you're not less worthy on the journey. It's because you're needed at some other place more. So if we can all embrace it in that kind of spirit, perhaps then we're ready to look into some of the extraordinary insights and beauties that Thomas is sort of handing back to us from the edge of the precipice. So if we can, let's take about a 5-minute break, and then we will begin to plunge in a bit to the 3 poems for today. Thank you. Be right back. Off we go. Number 3. In The Secret Embrace, if you're just joining us, Thomas Keating's last book of poetry, Loneliness in the Night. In my loneliness and longing, I dream of him in all his glory. How straight he stands, how handsome. I am drifting, drifting. I do not hear him speak. I only see him. His silence is a kiss. His presence an embrace. But now he is fading, fading, and I am alone. So when I first introduced these yesterday, commenting a little bit on the surprise that Thomas's last collection had been last gift to us literarily had been a gift of poems. I said, he hadn't written a poem since 8th grade. And that's literally true. This is the poem. You're right, if that shocks you. This poem he wrote when he was still in preparatory school as a bright 8th grader, maybe 14 years old. Does that shock you a little? I learned that from Peter Jones when we sat there. Remember, Peter was the one, Thomas's nephew, who put this volume together. And Thomas revised it a little right at the end by adding particularly the double fading, fading, drifting, drifting. But this is a slice of his early childhood, of his uh, young beginning emergence. And what really amazes me here in this poem is that how well it fits all together, how well it camouflages itself amongst the final poems. Uh, that if I hadn't told you, you probably wouldn't have suspected. Uh, isn't that amazing? Uh, and I think that what that tells us not only is how precocious he is, to already be picking up these things, which will be his life agenda when he's like 14. But in a sense, how, as I said, how stable a soul is over life. I mean, we think we're in time, but really, if you step back a little bit, I'm sure that if somebody has a God's eye view on us, what we look like is completed, full of the moon of ourselves is visible from a long way off. So already, the fact that there's a dialogue, a direct communion between this poem uh, written when he was 14 and ones that were written 94, what's that, 80 years later? Uh, it says something about the scope and depth and profundity and stability of the seeking soul in a human life. You'll also find here, and one of the reasons it belongs so well, is it sounds some fundamental leitmotifs, some fundamental notes that we'll hear reverberating in the later poems. He comes around in the poems at the end to emulate and reverberate not only with the ideas, but with the wording itself, the images itself. The sense that pervades this one is the sense of loss of something that was once so close, once so finite, and then fades and moves away, moves out of picture. Uh, uh, at first, how straight he stands, how handsome, how incarnate, and then drifting, drifting. I only see. And then even the seeing goes, and even as I'm fading, you can see the picture is gradually fading out. That sense of the thing that you thought you had right up close widens and fades and fades and fades and fades. And the deep longing and the deep sadness and the sense of being plunged into a, an abyss. Uh, who is he? Uh, does it matter? Maybe God, maybe Christ, maybe at the time pubescent infatuation. Who knows? What matters is it stands and represents the full incarnation, the 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 thing, the picture of love in finite form. Uh, I think as you read this poem, as you read it in the series and in the setting it wound up in, it's a wonderful way of thinking. The easiest transposition to make, at least for me, is to think of it as Christ, because and I'm not in any sense trying to say there that this is what Thomas intended. I'm pretty sure he didn't, but it lends itself to this. It makes sense and it will help you if you take it that way to understand the process that he's about to head into in the journey. That at first things in our faith stand firm, sacramental, heavy, concrete. And then this sort of strange drift and fade takes place. And they move into more and more kind of elusive and allusive form. Uh, just one other thing to comment upon before I leave this poem for now is this incredible third line. His silence is a kiss, his presence an embrace. Well, look at this. His silence is a kiss. And think that what you're hearing now is a 14-year-old boy. It's pretty clear at this point that he's going to be on a mystical journey. Notice this incredible sense of mystical paradox already there in the soul of a young lad. His silence is a kiss, his presence an embrace. What's the difference between a kiss and an embrace? He's already playing on that edge. So I think in a deep way, the book would not have been complete without this. It anchors this in the whole of the heart of Thomas Keating and sends it forward to us as we look at Thomas as both a finished work of art and of a journey, still very much at the beginning. He's both the crescent of the moon and the full of this moon in this poem. So if we can move to number 4, Twilight of the Self, which I would have to say for me is personally the most wrenching. I read this when we did our sort of memorial interfaith service at the Thomas Keating Seminar in Aspen last year. I read it as part of our Sunday morning presentation. I can never read it without choking up. It's so poignant. I almost know no poem more anguishing in the spiritual literature. So, Twilight of the Self. This is also the longest. My heart is solitary now. It finds no companionship anywhere and no wish to find any. My sole desire is you, and you are always absent. Can one love absence so intensely that even your presence seems like an intrusion? I move around in aimless circles. Rituals and sacred symbols, once treasured sources of relating to you, are meaningless to me now. They communicate nothing of you, who are everything to me, but for whom and from whom I feel no love nor hope of fulfillment. I am as one turned inside out, and there is nothing there, not you, not me. If this is union, there is neither two in one, nor one without another. I long to relate to everyone, yet lack the capacity to relate to anyone. There is only your boundless presence that treats me like a thing without a heart, except perhaps a broken heart. For the God I thought I knew no longer exists. What do you do in the presence of such unflinching, courageous anguish? You marvel, take a deep breath, and go deeper. I think, and this poem will carry you through a dark night. And he harrowingly describes from the inside what it feels like. I learned from Ted Jones, who was the other one of the Jones boys, Thomas's nephews, Peter the filmmaker, Ted the insight meditation teacher, and Ted was destined to play a very, very important role right at the end of Thomas's life. He still lives in Massachusetts, very near the Spencer Abbey, and so he became the one who saw Thomas nearly every day, followed him along on the last passage. Ted's a beautiful, clear human soul and teacher, gentle being. And Ted told me when we were there at the Aspen conference that he had, upon conversation with Pat Johnson, the impression that this poem was also a little bit earlier, that it really dated from that dark night period in Thomas's life that I was telling you about in my kind of autobiographical sketch yesterday. That dark time in the in the most of the 90s, in which he really had to confront some things both inwardly and outwardly. And I don't know whether that's true or not. I haven't confirmed that directly with Pat, and I don't want to be passing on misinformation. But I would say that that from the internal clues, that makes absolutely perfect sense to me. It completely resonates with what I would say is the headwaters, Dark Night A, as I would call them, as you make that transition from the last outposts of your dwelling in your finite self to the stable placement of yourself in the witnessing or unboundaried self, the wave form of yourself. That's really onset unitive way. And it's painful because what it really entails, the upside of it, the light at the end of the tunnel, is that you'll come through to a deeper sense of oneness with God than you ever knew before. But the downside is that yet again, you see everything you counted on just ripped away. This is the yanking out of the rug of spiritual consolation at a whole deeper level. Not only the things that make the experience of God pleasurable, but the basic rocks that have the building blocks of your journey in the first place, the core pieces conceptually, that you exist, that God exists, that you love each other, the Eucharist is there, the rituals are there. What when the whole thing, it just becomes like reading the telephone book? There's no way of using those old egoic mechanisms, even in their highest sense, to derive being energy and orientation from life. It's a time of profound scourging. This was the inner that was being experienced while the outer was rolling. And that so frequently happens in this dark night of the spirit, in all dark nights. The inner scourgings and the outer scourgings sort of reinforce to mutually intensify each other. So this whole poem is based on this paradoxical language. Apodictic language is what the professors of linguistics call it. This paradoxes dense packed so close together that they almost seem logical. And mystical poetry is full of it. Read Meister, Eckhart, or anybody. One paradox upon another as if they were logical for each other. So almost every of these short stanzas has got a contradiction. My heart is solitary. It finds no companionship and no wish to find any. My sole desire is you, and you are always absent. Again, that harrowing sense of loss, that like the boy looking out at the one that once 1 minute stood so close, and now it's fading, and he's drifting. He wants only this one, and that one is not there. And then this strange comment, this wonderful comment, can one love absence so intensely that even your presence seems like an intrusion? Well, what do we make of that? What I make of that paradox myself is this, that, my teacher, Rafe, the hermit monk out at Snowmass, the other great master I worked with during the ages there, used to say at once, talking about his transition into solitude, into hermit life, you have to endure the tedium until something emerges in it. And he didn't say emerges out of it, emerges in it. You have to endure the absence till something emerges in it. And that absence doesn't end the presence doesn't end the absence. It just embodies it in a different way. So what I take is going on the basis of this here is that it's in the absence, as he's experiencing it right now in this dark night, that he holds his point and heading of fidelity to this new emergence. It's in the absence that it's known. It's in the touch. And when it says that even your presence seems like an intrusion, I think that has to do with the presence now, because it somehow mysteriously takes you back. It takes you back to known reference points. It replaces absence with content. And you know that that's going backwards. That however beautiful the content, how ecstatic that moment. When, if God would suddenly burst out from behind wraps and say, "Here I am, Thomas, let me give you a hug." Thomas would have to say, "No, thank you, dearie. I'm doing my centering prayer." It's like we have to stay with the leading edge of what's drawing us along, even if it looks like total desolation. How does the heart know that? How does the heart learn? Again, a memory from when we buried Rafe at Snowmass, and this beautiful thing went across my mind and says, well, now you have to learn to prefer a live absence to a dead presence. That's about the moment when I almost fell into the grave in tears, but we had to learn to prefer a live absence to a dead presence. And part of what makes the nose so incredibly sensitive and delicate at this phase in the spiritual journey, at this point, a lot of people run backwards because it's scary out there on that edge. How do you ever do this? How do you prefer to keep walking toward the darkness when you see that light back on shore? But he nails it there, that presence would somehow be too jarring, too coarse. For something that's moving and gradually taking shape within the delicacy. Get it? Amazing nuance. And then I move around in aimless circles. Rituals and sacred symbols, once treasured sources of relating to you, are meaningless to me now. This happens to a lot of people on spiritual journey when they reach this exalted final stage. That there's an old Buddhist maxim that when you finally get to the top of the mountain, you have to dismount, get off the horse that carried you. And characteristically, I saw this in Rafe as well, that when he first entered the monastery, he hung on the Eucharist for dear life. And after a while, something loosens. It's all Eucharist. The planet is Eucharist. Breathing is Eucharist. And so much, the rituals become dry. The juice doesn't flow through them. It's not because you've lost your faith. It's because you've transcended that particular expression of the faith. The form can't hold them. And it often does bring, again, this sense of wandering around in a daze because you can't go back. I mean, why can't I just go down and sit there and go listen to a good old psalm and get a kick out of it and business is normal? You're in new turf now. This is a familiar, anguishing spot that many who've been on this journey talk about. Now, these next two verses for me, if you want to call them verses, really contain for me the nub of the transition of selfhood. So it starts out, these once treasured sources of relating to you are meaningless to me now. They communicate nothing of you, who are everything to me, but for whom and from whom I feel no love nor hope of fulfillment. Well, let's look at that a little bit in terms of the map we've been working at already. The what we're seeing to here, the thing that for most of us binds us to God, binds us to the path, is love. And as a matter of fact, in the classic depictions of the unitive journey, love is right in the forefront. The imagery is nuptial. It's looked like a feast where you and God are just embracing each other. It feels like a love and abundance. But Thomas is saying, not only does he feel no love from God, but he feels no love for God. Oh, does this mean he's losing his faith? No. It means that love is dropping out, at least love as we know it, as the channel of communion between the two. Love as we basically know it in our human life has even that become too emotional, too sentimental, too exuberant to carry this finer sentiment. Love as affection, love as emotion is gone. Love, and then they communicate nothing. You can find no hope of fulfillment. It's only the time-bound self that really is still in search of fulfillment. The self that already lives beyond time exists in a sense of perpetual fullness because it's with one. So what you see in this paragraph, this wonderful stanza, is that what's melting down is not only the conceptual, but the affective mechanisms by which God is retrieved in most of our finite self walk of life. And of course, normally, when we receive love from God, it gives us energy. It's a sense of food for us. This is what flows into our being as the life that makes us know we're alive. And, one of the things they say about the dark night that you experience in the dark night is it's a kind of depression because you're no longer able to feed yourself. You can't draw on all these old things. Let's have some love. Let's have some faith. Let's have the basic energy systems in your being have all run on me being here and the world being out there. As that basic dialectic starts to collapse, for a moment, you are left malnourished. You don't know how to feed yourself and the planet. You don't know how to gain vital energy. So when you have people like Thérèse of Lisieux or Julian Norwich lying there in bed, sickness unto death, this is what it's all about. There's a new system of feeding that is going to kick into gear, but you don't see it yet. What you experience is just the immolation of everything you thought you were. So I am as one turned inside out, and there is nothing there. Not you, not me. If this is union, there is neither two in one, nor one without another. Well, interesting, very compact questions there. There's nothing there, not you, not me. Both Bernadette Roberts and Beatrice Bruto, who I referred to a little earlier, that wonderful Christian non-dual teacher who was a good close friend of Thomas's, both point out that God identity and self-identity are joined at the hip. And that when you drop out, when you no longer are encountering yourself as, well, here I am in me, I'm in my journey with God, and I'm an Enneagram 6, and I'm traveling along dealing with my full self. And when you don't do that anymore, the God that corresponds to that drops out too. And just as you're becoming precisely lighter and more subtle and more delicate in your inner touch, so God's subtilization matches. Until finally, as Bernadette Roberts says, and again hitting the nail on the head, you drop out and God drops out. So he doesn't take you quite so far in that one sentence, but he says, well, if this is union, it's not like it looks when you read it in the books. There's neither two in one, which is the classic Western way of seeing it. You and God become this sort of nuptial union, nor is it one without the other. The great monad, Atman is Brahman, that sort of pervades the Eastern non-dual traditions. It's something else. What is it? It's a beautiful, incredible, fiery, succinct journey through this, dismembering and refashioning of identity and all the retrieval systems that emerge out of it. I long to relate to everyone, yet lack the capacity to relate to anyone. And then I like to read that connected right onto the next. There is only your boundless presence. Because the reason he's lacked the capacity to relate to anyone is not because he's becoming unfriendly, not because this is turning him into a psychotic, but because his attention is totally absorbed in this boundless presence. I mean, he's got his eye on it still. This is where it's going. This is the only thing, the ultimate thing. And he's not going to get distracted. Once again, he's not going to run back by being Mr. Helpful to everybody. You gotta hang with the game while it's hanging. And then he says, there is only your boundless presence that treats me like a thing without a heart, except perhaps a broken heart. And it's that point that my own heart cracks in this poem. Because, you can think you're the great non-dual warrior. Yeah, bring on this transpersonal, bring it on. I don't need all that stuff anymore. I don't need my cute little God. But we are human. We have hearts. We form relationships. As I said a little bit earlier, that the earlier stages of our journey never drop out. And they can't drop out, because that's what we bring back to God, the finite human being with its joys, with its sufferings, and its reality, the little slice of particularity it owned on this journey. And so when Thomas adds this last line on, what this tells me is that he's talking not as an Eastern mystic, but as a Western non-dual mystic, as a Christian mystic who holds the preciousness of our finite selfhood, who doesn't say it's an illusion, doesn't say it's a mirage, says it's a tender paschal treasure that we hold, that is broken open, and out of that flows back into the divine some essence, some elixir of beauty, of holiness, of love returned. You just gotta go through it. You can't use your non-dual attainment to hide your broken heart. Not if you're a human on the Christian mystical path. So I weep for them. For the God I thought I knew no longer exists. That is the standing there on that witnessing precipice, looking back at the whole beautiful castle that was constructed in the illuminative way. As you and God, your co-pilot, went merrily along doing good for the world, founding religions, founding contemplative movements. Bye. We now face something new. So you can see, and I can see, it's early unitive dark night for me. We're going to see in the next poem, which I'll start with tomorrow, not today, because I don't think we can go any further than we've gone today, and tomorrow's will make a good starting point. With the second one, where that sense of stripping and how far can you just spread out this filament of selfhood, turns. and something else happens. And that turn is magical. And we're going to start right tomorrow when we start working with the poems. We'll do that, and then the others will flow out of that quite easily. We can get it all done in one day. So yeah, sorry perhaps to leave you with a heavy dose today, but it does it does bring us, I think, into sync with the planet. You know, I come back to that question that was asked, you know, are we really going to be facing here in this pandemic a collective surfacing of the false self? Maybe, if we have the courage to face it. So Thomas has given us in this beautiful picture really a profile in courage. Can we sit with it? Can we take it into heart? And can we let this profile become a mirror to examine our own courage as we move forward? We'll see you tomorrow, same time, place, and station. Namaste.